Welcome to this explainer. All right, grab your notebooks because today we are diving into an operation that perfectly proves how sheer mechanized manpower can just get completely outmaneuvered by geography and pure grit. For today's session, I want you to put yourselves right in the mindset of strategic analysts and historians. We're looking at the April 1940 Nazi invasion of Norway, but not just as a standard textbook military blitzkrieg. No, we're studying this as an absolute masterclass in logistics, asymmetric warfare, and the geopolitical power of sovereign wealth. We're talking about a historical event that literally altered the trajectory of World War II. It's a true David and Goliath scenario, except here, the battlefield is defined by ice and altitude. Here's our syllabus for today. We'll start with the ultimate strategic prize, then look at Phase 1, modern logistical failure. Then we'll pivot to Phase 2, asymmetric alpine tactics, followed by Phase 3, the fjord labyrinth, and finally wrap up with the sovereign wealth impact. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to dissect exactly how the Norwegians iteratively tested, failed, and adapted their logistics under the crushing, immediate pressure of a collapsing national infrastructure. Okay, Part 1, the ultimate strategic prize. Now, to truly understand the scale of this crisis, we have to start with the target itself. On April 9th, 1940, Operation Weserübung brought German warships tearing through the fjords, right? Heavily armed paratroopers raining down on the capital city of Oslo. It was swift, it was brutal, and highly coordinated. But Adolf Hitler's true target wasn't just strategic deep-water ports or, political control. The real prize lay hidden deep beneath the fortified vault of the Bank of Norway. He was hunting exactly 50 tons of pure gold bullion. 50 tons! Just imagine the sheer back-breaking gravity of that for a second. To put it in perspective, we're talking about roughly 3 billion modern dollars packed into 1,500 heavy wooden crates. If the Nazis captured this wealth, it would be an immediate, massive injection of capital. It could finance their war machine for months, completely underwrite the occupation, and effectively crush the Norwegian resistance before it even got off the ground. That gold was literally the key to holding the country. So, as students of history and logistics, I want you to consider this impossible constraint. How exactly do you pull off an evacuation of this physical magnitude when the enemy is already surrounding you? You've got 50 tons of dead weight, a city actively falling apart under bombardment, and an enemy running on mechanized speed and utter surprise. You can't just quietly slip out the back door with thousands of pounds of bullion. Every single decision here carries the weight of a nation's survival. The infrastructural failure was absolute. Just a total logistical nightmare. You couldn't use the railroads because, well, the Luftwaffe immediately bombed and captured the tracks. You couldn't fly it out because the enemy entirely controlled the skies. And Nazi intelligence was already sweeping the city, interrogating officials, making local concealment completely impossible. With a 500-mile abyss of frozen alpine mountains and treacherous narrow fjords standing between them and safety, the Norwegians realized they had to weaponize their own brutal winter geography. Which brings us to Phase 1, modern logistical failure. Let's look at their very first hypothesis. Initially, it was all about trying to use modern civilian transport to outpace the highly mechanized German advance. Basically, they thought they could beat machines with machines. Picture this scene. You have ordinary accountants, bank tellers, and civilian volunteers suddenly acting as high-stakes getaway divers. As German troops were literally marching into the front doors of the central bank, the last of the gold slipped out the back. They loaded up 26 civilian trucks, driving through the pitch dark, covering 160 kilometers of icy roads to a temporary hideout in Lillehammer, desperately dodging into pine tree lines whenever bombers droned overhead. But this first phase failed almost immediately. Massive, unplowed snowbanks and the rapid advance of heavily armored Nazi units rendered their combustion engines completely useless. The roads just became dead ends. And that forces our next evolution, Phase 2, asymmetric alpine tactics. Trapped by the strict limitations of modern machinery and the encroaching enemy, the whole strategy had to fundamentally pivot. They went from mechanized military logistics to an unbelievable display of pure human defiance. It's a brilliant historical irony, really. When the cutting edge of 1940s combustion machinery failed against the icy roads, they just reverted to the oldest alpine technology known to humanity: wood, snow, and muscle. Working in total secrecy, local resistance groups, off-duty soldiers, and even local children stepped up. They started manually hauling thousands of pounds of boxed gold on wooden sleds and alpine skis. They literally dragged these crates up sheer vertical mountain passes in -20-degree temperatures, operating entirely off the grid. And by doing this, they achieved what we call geographic camouflage. See, the German war machine was built for speed and paved roads, not vertical Arctic whiteouts. The weather actually leveled the playing field. The exact same blizzards that froze the advanced mechanized German infantry in place became the perfect asymmetric advantage for the Norwegians. The brutal, swirling white snow completely swallowed their human silhouettes, making them practically invisible to enemy scouts and aircraft. They effectively turned hostile weather into an impenetrable defensive shield. Absolutely brilliant. But naturally, the mountain terrain eventually ran out. Let's move to Phase 3, the Fjord Labyrinth. By mid-April, as this human-powered caravan funneled down into the coastal regions and reached the tiny, exposed port of Åndalsnes, the operation hit its absolute breaking point. The mountains had provided cover, sure, but the coast? It offered absolutely nowhere to hide. If you track their progress here, you can see how the pressure curve spikes into a full-blown crisis. Step 1, the civilian trucks to Lillehammer. Step 2, the sled caravan through the mountains. Step 3, rendezvous with a British cruiser at Åndalsnes. But this is exactly where the trap snapped shut. Literally just as the sled teams lined up the heavy crates on the docks to meet the HMS Galatea, the Luftwaffe spotted them. They unleashed an absolute inferno, leveling the town to ash and forcing the British ship to cut its lines and flee to open sea just to avoid total destruction. That devastating attack left 30 tons of gold just sitting there, completely exposed on a burning dock. The German army was less than a day's march away. The deep water ports were obliterated, and the skies were thick with enemy planes. The lesson here was brutal but clear. Relying on conventional military transports, like giant visible cruisers, was a fatal flaw, because they were just massive targets from the sky. They desperately needed a profoundly different maritime strategy. So they pivoted again, deploying what became known as the Ghost Fleet. Those remaining 30 tons, they were loaded onto completely unassuming, ordinary wooden civilian fishing boats. And these weren't soldiers. These were local fishermen who knew the treacherous vertical coastal geography like the back of their hands. They navigated the jagged maze of the inner fjords exclusively at night under total blackout conditions. And by day, they used the towering stone cliffs as literal blackout curtains, hiding deep inside the pitch-black shadows to block the view of the passing Nazi planes overhead. Which brings us to our final act, the sovereign wealth impact. After 2 grueling weeks of this deadly, high-stakes game of Arctic hide-and-seek, slipping past blockades, surviving freezing storms, the fleet finally reached the remote northern port of Tromsø. Way up there, far from the main theater of invasion, the treasure was safely transferred onto heavily armed British warships. Now check out this staggering success rate. Out of the entire 50 tons that the Third Reich was aggressively hunting down, the Norwegians successfully evacuated 99.9% of it. Out of all those crates, they lost exactly 1 single gold bar when it accidentally slid off a truck into a deep, untracked mountain snowdrift. I'd say that's a pretty microscopic tax for saving an entire nation's treasury. Against all logistical odds, the wealth was secure. So, shifting gears from thriller narrative to macroeconomic analysis here. The crucial question is, what did that preserved wealth actually accomplish? Well, by safely securing their reserves in foreign vaults in New York and Ottawa, the exiled government maintained absolute financial independence. This wasn't just some symbolic victory, guys. It served as an arsenal of independence. It practically funded an independent free military, it financed a massive international merchant fleet to aid the Allies, and it backed a relentless, highly organized domestic underground resistance network. And because of that continuous independent funding, that hidden domestic resistance successfully tied down over 300,000 German soldiers in Norway for the remainder of the war. Let that sink in. That is 300,000 pairs of boots missing from the eastern and western front lines, all because Norway kept its checkbook out of Nazi hands. Hitler desperately needed those elite troops elsewhere, but he could never safely redeploy them without losing the country entirely to the well-funded resistance. The Nazi war machine genuinely believed that raw industrial military power could overwhelm any nation. But this entire case study proves that when citizens know how to turn their own rugged geography into an asymmetric defense, they can freeze even the most perfect blitzkrieg right in its tracks. Simply put, Hitler captured the physical land, sure, but he completely failed to capture the sovereign wealth required to actually legitimize his conquest. As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this final thought for your own analysis. Can physical conquest ever truly defeat a nation that retains its financial independence? The mountain didn't just hide the gold, it literally saved a nation's future. It proves that true sovereignty doesn't just live in the soil, it lives in the retained wealth and the unbroken will of its people. Thank you for joining me for this session. Keep analyzing the hidden logistics of history, and I'll see you in the next explainer.